Hi, my name is John Lynch. I was a head teacher in Brighton and Croydon for 25 years, and I'm going to talk for a while, not too long hopefully, about my career and how I got into teaching. I left sixth form in Bristol in the early 1970s with no idea about what I wanted to do. I decided to come to Eastbourne College of Education to train to be a teacher, only because I had a friend who was in art college in Eastbourne at the time, and that really was the only reason. But I had a good time at college, and by the time I'd finished my third teaching practice, I decided that teaching was a career for me. Whilst at college, I studied English with PE as a secondary subject. Look out for that if you're a male teacher. Look out for being pushed towards PE in a school, but we'll see what happens with you. When I left college, I didn't work in teaching for some time. I concentrated on playing rugby for Eastbourne Rugby Club and working as a roofer and a builder, but jobs were few and far between at the time. But I eventually got a job in Croydon on an East End resettlement estate called New Addington. Tough school, but really enjoyable. It was great fun at the time, and fun is a word that I often think of when I think about my teaching career. Bearing in mind that I had no idea what I wanted to do, I had no idea what my talents were, and it was only looking at what was going on around me in schools and in classrooms over time that I began to understand that I could make a positive contribution. So my career started in Croydon. I was teaching in a junior school, as I said, on New Addington. But things happened, whether by design or whether by luck or whether by just fortune, and I became an advisory teacher, which meant that I was visiting lots of different schools in Croydon, talking about the teaching of practical science. Don't know how I got there, but I did. That again was good fun, and the great thing about it was that I was able to see how different institutions were managed. I was able to sense as soon as I walked into a staff room or a classroom what the ethos and the culture was like and how it impacted on the children. So I got that early understanding soon in my career. During the time that I was doing that, I studied for a B.Ed part-time at Sussex University. And because of that and my experience, I was able to get a deputy headship in a school in Croydon. And later on, during that time, I studied for an MA in Curriculum, Institution, Development and Action Research, which again stood me in good stead for management things that I had to cope with as I grew in my career. It was a fascinating situation in my first deputy headship because the head retired ill after a term, so I had to become an acting head at the age of 35. The school was quite a challenging school in terms of attitudes and ideas, and most of what was going on I felt was against my beliefs really, and how children should be managed and how staff should be managed. So when I was appointed as acting head, I immediately started to make changes, and luckily for me those changes were beneficial to the whole school environment, so I got the headship in the September at 36 years old. I was there for 8 years, and I can remember that my main aim over that time was to influence the culture of the school, to change attitudes, to develop relationships, and indeed the school did change over time. I remember not being very good at being able to concentrate on results and Ofsteds and things like that. But I remember being very good at being able to concentrate on what was good for the people in that institution. So that it was good to see people smiling in the morning. It was good to see parents at the gate happy that their children were coming to school, but that really did take time. It took, I would say, 4 years before children in year 6 were crying at the end of term because they were sad about leaving the school. Um, so after that, I moved down to Brighton. I got a headship in a junior school in Brighton, which again I was pleased to join because the culture there was already established, and we had the opportunity to develop on that. Fantastic relationships with the children, and obviously over time I was able to appoint staff that bought into that culture and developed a really good school, what we thought was a really good school anyway. I was only there for 4 years because I really did want to move to a primary school. I understood very early on in my career when I was visiting schools in Croydon that the atmosphere in an infant school could be absolutely fantastic. Children developed a real love of learning from an early age, and I wanted to see if that could be taken right through to year 11. And I know now that some schools take it right through to year 11 and year up to the 16-year-olds in secondary school. So it can be done, and that was my main aim when I went to the primary school in Brighton. I was there for 13 years, and because I was there for 13 years, it meant that we could appoint staff who really bought in to what we were trying to do. So it was lovely to see children being happy to come to school, happy when they left school. It was lovely to see parents happy that their children were coming to our school. We were oversubscribed. And again, it was not about results. It was about how people felt when they were in that institution. The challenge that we found was to develop that ethos and culture and maintain those core values, and as well keep up with the results and Ofsted and those aspects of education which have become very political of late. But we were able to do it. It was, for me, one of the best times of my career, that 13 years, and I always remember driving to school, seeing the building as I drove up the hill and looking forward to going into the building, despite the huge challenges that there were every day, every week. But the challenges were outweighed by the positives, and that's the thing about a teaching career. I can't think of another career where you can go in every day, meet individuals, be influenced by individuals from the age of 4 to 16, meet some really lovely people on a daily basis, and you're interacting with people on a daily basis, and you can use the talents that you've developed whilst studying, whilst being at university, talents like communication, talents like understanding, developing ideas about people and how to move them forward and how to get the best out of them and the best for them. It really is, I think, a wonderful career. So I retired in 2013. I was 60 at the time. I'd felt that the teaching profession had given me everything it possibly could, and I felt that I'd given the teaching profession everything I possibly could. But I do recall it was one that I really, really enjoyed. I never thought that I would move on to something that I would enjoy even more than teaching, but that's what happened. When I retired, I was lucky enough to be appointed as chair for a needs assessment group in Brighton, which was looking at the needs of BAME people throughout the city, not just in education, but in health, in policing, in housing, in all areas of life. It was a very challenging report, over 200 pages, and unfortunately it showed that BAME people were somewhat disadvantaged living in the city of Brighton, and it reflected what was happening in the rest of the country. That was an interesting role, and at the same time I applied for a job as a placement tutor at the University of Brighton, where I obviously went into schools and observed teachers teaching and graded them, whatever, and advised them and supported them in their early careers. Again, lovely work. I also, just off my own back, became a facilitator for the National College of Teaching and Learning. So every now and then, once or twice a term, I'd go up to London to the Institute of Education and facilitate sessions for aspiring heads, deputy heads, which looked at curriculum, management, all aspects of being a leader in a school. So that in itself was interesting and something that I wouldn't have thought I would have got into looking back on my early career. But I think that's the thing about teaching. Once you get into it, your avenues widen. And I didn't realise that until I'd finished. I'd retired. So I was a placement tutor. I was a facilitator at the National College of Learning. And I also began to deliver talks on equality and diversity. I can't even remember how this came about, whether it happened out of the blue, whether I was invited, or whether it was an idea I had. But obviously I developed ideas about equality and diversity in education because of my experience and particularly because of being a black head teacher. The teaching force is not as diverse as it could be in terms of people of colour, and that's an important thing to consider if you are a student of colour from a BAME background. Please try and get into teaching because the force needs to be more diverse. So I developed these talks on equality and diversity, which I found really interesting. It was a challenge for me. It was great to get my mind focused on something that I was really interested in. And I began to deliver these talks. And to date, I've delivered talks on equality and diversity to Sussex Police, Surrey Police. As a result of that, I delivered the talk to a National Police Custody Forum up in Sheffield. And then after that, I was invited to the Ministry of Justice digital team to deliver the same talk. I've also spoken to the Premier League, delivered that talk to a Premier League football session in the education department. And as a result of that, I'm now a member of the Board of Education of the Premier League. It still surprises me the avenues that are open to me simply because I did a Cert Ed back in the early 70s. But my experience, my developments, my ideas, and my love of the profession has helped me to do all these things. One of the other things that I do is run mentoring programs. I'm a mentor for Momentum at the University of Brighton, and with my colleague Beth Thomas Hancock, run mentoring programs, two separate programs. One is for students. It's a BAME Match Mentoring program. We started running the program 4 years ago, I think, in the School of Education because I was a placement tutor, I was on a committee that was looking at statistics, and the statistics showed that BAME students of colour were less likely to get a 2-1 and more likely to drop out. We wanted to find out what that was, so we started a mentoring program where we used local people of colour who were in professions, professional people, to mentor students, and it was hugely successful in terms of the response of students who began to talk about their experiences in life in Brighton and at the university that impacted on their studies. That program was very successful, and subsequently we started to work again with the School of Health Science. Again, the response was good, and we were able to build up our resources in terms of local people to be mentors, local BAME people. And now the program runs throughout the university. So if you're a student of colour in any school in the university, you can apply to us for a BAME mentor. It's really, really good work. Because of that, and as an offshoot of that, I was talking to a local teacher about it, and he said it would be great if you could mentor our BAME Year 11 students. So we did. We set up the program very quickly using university students to mentor pupils in school. Again, it was very successful, so we applied to an organisation called NCOP and the Sussex Learning Network to see if we could get funds to run a program where we used university students to mentor pupils in schools. And again, just incredibly successful. And I said earlier that teaching is a fantastic career, and it is, but the mentoring that I'm involved in now in the BAME community is certainly the best and most rewarding thing that I've ever done. So now we mentor, we go into schools, where the school selects 10 or so pupils of colour, and we match them with 10 or so students of colour from the University of Brighton, and they engage in a 6-week mentoring programme where the university students are brought into the school and spend an hour or so with the students in a mentoring session. And as I said, it's really worthwhile, really good. So that's where I am at the moment in my career. I'm very fortunate because I can work part-time. Another thing that I did, which I never expected to do when I was teaching, was to set up a company so that when I retired I was able to work through my company and earn through my business. So I now have a company called Lynch Consultancy and Training, and some of the work I do is through that company. Certainly the talks that I do is through that company. Some of the mentoring work I do is through that company. So again, it was because of going into the career of teaching that I was able to use all my experience, ideas I developed, the fortunate situation I was in because I was working around and with people who had fantastic ideas, fantastic attitudes that I could learn from. And I've used those to move on in my career. So if you're thinking of teaching as a career, whether your strengths are in literacy or PE or numeracy or science or biology, I would certainly give it some heavy consideration, because you can develop so many ideas and you can develop yourself as a person. And I can't think of any other career where, as I said, you're working with people all day, every day. From the age of 4 to the age of 16 or beyond, and it's a good thing to do. It's a fun thing to do. So I hope you take my advice and take up or strongly consider a career in teaching.